from this overpowering sense that we grew up with, that that Aoui would be the language for peace through understanding, and
Mm-hmm.
world wars happen every 30 years, my father said, and an average throughout history, about every generation there are some kind of world war. At least I felt it as a child. Um, well, not mandate, but at least pressure to, that if I didn't continue this, it would be a disaster and so forth.
Welcome to Conlangery, the podcast about constructed languages and the people who create them. I'm George Corley, and with me in the great state of Washington is Andrea Weilgart. And Andrea is the daughter of the creator of Aoui, the language of space. So, Andrea, how are you doing?
Well, I'm thank you so much, George, for inviting me, and I've tried to prepare. I've approached this with some trepidation because I'm thinking of this as mostly a linguistic approach, and so um, I'm feeling like I'm not necessarily have all the necessary background, but I'm sure I've spent most of my life, or a lot of my life, working with Aoui. So that's something that has interested me for a long time, and I don't know, though, as far as how it is received in the linguistic community.
Yes. Well, when you had someone contacted me and said you were interested in coming on, it was interesting to me because Aoui is one of those languages that, at least when I started with the Conlang community, it's sort of like it's one of those languages that floats around as like an example of something unique. And I thought it would be interesting to hear from someone close to the creator and hear a little bit about the language. To start with, um, can you talk to me a little bit about how you have been involved with this language and uh, apparently sort of continuing on your father's legacy, and like how um how did that develop? Did you grow up learning about it, or how did that work?
Well, my sister and I, and mostly I, were kind of co-opted as my father's guinea pigs, and
Mm-hmm.
in writing the symbols on the board during classes in his seminars on the psychology of communication at Luther College. And he would always he at first, actually, they started in our home, and it was very informal, and my mother would have dessert at the end, and it was just in our small little living room, um, and we'd be the ones writing the symbols on this big, huge, heavy real heavy slate, and then we'd sometimes play these word guessing games, which was, that was kind of fun, and and then later it got moved to the college as a class up at the college, and a seminar, evening seminar, and we were always expected to go every Monday night from 7 to 9. And and in addition to that, we did a lot of typing of my father's German written German shorthand written in English manuscripts of a different book actually that never got published, but also the sequel to the Aoui book, which is the um, Cosmic Elements of Meaning, is it more of a kind of a philosophy behind the symbology, and so um, we would spend, because at that time we didn't have a good enough typewriter, so we got to use the one of the office's IBM typewriters during the off hours, so we'd be up there in the wee hours of the night typing,
Yeah.
and so anyway, so yeah, so and and I always thought that it was it always drew me because of the beauty and simplicity of the symbols. And there was,
Hmm.
as a teenager, um, it was, not necessarily my favorite thing to do because it was sort of expected, but and but still I saw my father's, I really felt deeply, I guess because I'm the older one, felt deeply his idealistic, this as an idealistic cause. And he, however, he taught it. And in our family, it was almost like this, I don't know, it was almost like a mission. And so, which I wish, and other professors at the college, I think, or at least a few have said, that it would have been better if he had done actual research with the language.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's kind of the direction that I would be more interested, although I also come from this background of spreading it in popularizing it. So I'm kind of in between these two worlds, because it still doesn't seem to be well known enough, and also every
Yeah.
attempt that we have made in the past to approach linguists, at least at that time, 20, 30 years ago or more, um, there wasn't an interest for that, and at all. Even back in 2001, when I went to
Uh-huh.
the um, LSA Linguistics Summer Institute on Linguistics or Semantics or whatever it was, Linguistics Institute at Berkeley, not Berkeley, not at Santa Barbara. Um, I talked with several professors there, and they see it as a historical one, or at the kind of maybe the
Like
final,
a relic, right?
well, yeah, but a final example of this long, centuries long search for a language that based on semantic primitives. And so, but as far as taking it seriously from a linguistic standpoint, either they say it's too complicated or they say it's too simplistic. And
Hmm.
so, but anyway, but so there's always been something that has drawn me back to it, and so after my father passed away in 1981, um, I kind of felt that at some point I was going to get back to it, and I was just waiting for someone to um, support me and help me in that endeavor. And I wish I could have gotten a degree in linguistics, but even then, at that time, conlangs were not something that was supported
Yeah.
in a research sense. I think now, within the last, I don't know, 10 years, that might have been more something that might be possible. Anyway, so I've
Yeah.
talked
Well,
long enough.
I will say, um, conlangs in general have not really have more recently gotten some respect from academics, but like uh even when I was starting grad school, I was iffy about like how much I wanted to talk about conlanging with my professors, right? Because I didn't know what their reaction would be. And then something like Aoui, um, seeing how it is, and it's that might be even more because it is quite a radical experiment. So, if you're on the audio, behind Andrea are the entirety of the symbols that make up Aoui. Is that right? That's the whole chart, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the phonemes as well as the the sememes. Is that what we're calling?
Well, the graphemes and the phonemes
The
and
morphemes.
each individual segment is a morpheme on its own, right? And so this is what nowadays at the time this terminology wasn't there. This is what we would nowadays call an oligosynthetic language, where it has a very minimal set of roots that are combined in order to make more meanings. Can you tell me about like why was choice made to have these very few primitive roots, and like how that was used to construct how that is used to construct larger words?
I think my father's idea was to find concepts that all languages and cultures had in common. And the fact that you need, in order to have a language, and with a phoneme assigned to each morpheme, there's of course a limitation right there, because the most common phonemes um, pretty much comprise the alphabet as we know it. Um, and so, unless you get really crazy, and I mean, no, unless you go to more exotic languages, I guess. I don't know if that's the right term either. Just languages that are not familiar in the Western world, shall we say, as much.
Uh-huh.
And um, so ideally they would be fairly easy to pronounce, and uh, they pretty much are, except for Americans. The U and the Ö are the ones that, and the H maybe, are the ones that are end up being more difficult. But so, in order to limit it by phonemes, you can only have so many morphemes assigned, and um, also, so the way that he, part of the way that he, I think, came to identify them is, I mean, aside from his studying of almost a dozen different languages, including Japanese, um, he um, took. Uh, there was some kind of process, I think, as I understood it, where he would take words and keep going, like in the dictionary, keep going down, finding simpler and simpler definitions, and then when the definition became circular, then then you find the most basic ones that aren't defined in any more simpler terms, and usually what happens is they become circular in the dictionary, and then you start using the word
Right.
that you use to define it. So he, and of course also from his background in philosophy, and you know um, he came to posit that these could be potentially universal, or at least represented in other languages in some form, not
Right.
necessarily not necessarily lexemically represented, but the concept be represented.
Right. That's an interesting process to go through, because like just to let the audience know that sort of getting into a cyclical sort of a loop uh in definitions, that will happen with any dictionary, because we don't dictionaries can only define words by other words, but in reality, the way that words are defined are based on connecting them to something in the world, right? So so it's interesting that he was going and finding these loops and then trying to figure out what is like the essential meaning that could be shared by different languages. It's an interesting thought experiment. It's an interesting experiment. It is. Um, Now, I do want to go into. There are some claims about Aoui that 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 were made that I kind of want to address, because there are, and as you said, there wasn't really research done on it, but there were claims that made that like it would help defend against propaganda in certain ways. And there were claims made that it was less arbitrary than natural languages. And I kind of want to poke at that, because those are big claims to make. And to me, like, first of all, looking at the arbitrariness, I would say that even when you're thinking about trying to make the symbols that you have up are trying to be iconic, but there's still some amount of arbitrariness to
Yeah.
their to choosing them, right? And also bigger claims about making a language that will change the way people think. There are a lot of like engineered languages that make that claim, or that people make that claim about.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's hard to see what the, I'm not sure what the evidence is for that.
Right.
So, can
Well,
you address those?
well, okay. So as far as arbitrariness, you mean ultimately, um, language is okay. So here's a question: is it not possible to have is arbitrariness on a scale, so that it's neither a fully non-arbitrary or it's fully arbitrary, so that yes, I think if you connect the symbols and sound with some kind of rationale that relates it to reality, then is that make it a slightly less or somewhat less arbitrary?
I suppose it can. Like, if I looking at your chart, so your um your symbol for round is a good example. It's like a circle that's inside another circle. I can see that the the symbol, the written symbol itself, is is fairly what we would call iconic. Iconic means that the linguistic form is itself representative of what it means in the real world in some way, right? Um, and we can, in natural languages, we do find iconicity like this. We find it in syntax. We find it where like serial verb constructions will follow a temporal order that is the same as the temporal order that you would have. You find in sign languages, actually, sign languages seem to have more iconicity than oral languages. For what reason, it's hard to say, but like, I believe, like, like, like ASL for milk is this, right? Milking a cow's udders, right? So you can have signs in a language. You can have symbols in a language that are closer to what it represents in the real world. There's I believe that there's always going to be some amount of jump, just because if nothing else, you're filtering through human perception.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be some kind of arbitrary mapping.
There has to be.
And
There has to
yes,
be, because I
but
mean,
there
yeah,
definitely is a scale, as you say.
yeah.
And
Thank you. Okay. Well,
there,
glad for
I
that.
I could see that you could make an argument that Aoui is maybe less arbitrary, at least in the written symbols. In
Mhm.
the sort of the sound to meaning mapping, uh, maybe I saw on your site that you have rationales for why the sounds were chosen for the meanings,
Mhm.
and that seems like less of a connection for a lot of them, but still makes some sense.
Well, I mean, language language is so complex.
Yeah.
And it's a concept of the mind. It's trying to put ethereal thought thinking into our thoughts, our ethereal thoughts, into something that is expressible verbally, and sounds put to it, and then another person to understand that, and how to do that. I mean, how to, compared to conventional language, I mean, it just seems like, still quite a ways down, away from, relatively speaking,
Mm-hmm.
less arbitrary than what you would find in conventional language.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
so I mean, as you can see here, a dot before a line means before. It's in front of uh, the
Mm-hmm.
line. Puh, and it's a plosive. You puff the air out in front of the lips. And b is a bilabial stop. B, it's easy to see how the lips are b pressed together, and it means
Right.
together, and so forth. And k is articulated in the upper palate, or upper velum, if
Mm-hmm.
that's correct. And g is felt to be more inside g, um, and so forth. And E is the brightest sound. It has the highest frequency. And so E, and it's a forward, it's a frontal vowel, E. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
bright and front, and E sound, the sound wave is just held longer. So because sound travels more slowly than
Yeah.
light, and so forth.
Uh,
But then, okay. Yeah.
yeah. And those are these are all very interesting, like, ideas of how these go. At the same time, I can see, like, even in the ones that you are pointing out, there are still some choices made. Like you say, okay, a dot before the line for before. Now, that still only makes sense once you have chosen the writing direction for the script, uh, which happens to me the same as what English does, is left to right.
Yeah.
And there's also, because the symbols are still pretty abstract, you still have sort of a situation of they've been reduced quite a bit from what maybe an even more representative thing would be. And there are also ones in there, like good is clearly a plus sign. Negation probably is derived from a negative sign, right?
Well, and also
So,
because it negates what is below it.
okay. But it is interesting. I I think I would concede that there are symbols in there that are more iconic than um than is typical for words in a language. But uh you know, there's still some level of arbitrariness. I do want to say like there's also the claims that this language will change the way you think and
Right.
change the way
Well,
you perceive things.
that remains to be
Yeah.
tested, I suppose. I mean, I don't know how much you know of how the language came about. That my father's, um, he, he was a young man under Hitler
Mm-hmm.
at the time that Hitler came to power, and he was very um, realized, I mean, and experienced the plethora of slogans that were around at the time, that the uh, what is it, the Department of um, the of language manipulation of under Hitler's regime. um, they very intentionally um, used language and slogans to um, emotionally, reach the masses of people, listening to them on when he spoke to masses of people. And um, these alliterative slogans, and they are common in most any, I mean, in many situations in our politics today, that make use of these similar sounds. The parachesis. Have you heard of that? Parachesis. Anyway, alliteration.
Mm-hmm.
And and my father's, the one of the um, research researchers that he did cite was Gregory Bazran, and his idea of who did this research on semantic conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And my father's conclusion was that though that the or his idea was that though the conscious mind may think in synonyms, but the subconscious mind may associate an assonance. And so that, and I would have to, Luria and Vinogradova is the paper here, an objective investigation of the dynamics of semantic systems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is in the British Journal of Psychology. It's from 1959. Um, and so what they did was they performed some classical conditioning experiments on subjects that using words as a stimulant. And it would be better if I just read this. Is that okay?
Yeah, you can read that.
Um, yeah, it's just a little paragraph here. Um, One such method was applied by Schwartz in 48-49, recording the change in light sensitivity of a dark adapted eye resulting from a sudden illumination. She then combined this sudden illumination with the pronouncing by the experimenter of the word doctor, meaning physician. After a few combinations, this word, which up till then had been neutral, began to provoke a conditioned reflex. Okay, so that's a conditioned response, and lowering the thresholds of light sensitivity. But as the experiment showed, such a lowering of the thresholds of light sensitivity was objectively provoked by the use of a number of other equivalent words too, and a normal adult subject knew such words as, these are Russian, vrach and lekar, both meaning physician, which sound completely different, but which
Mhm.
are equivalent to the keyword in meaning. And tests carried out to check this showed that words similar in sound, but pertaining to a different sense group, for instance, the word dictor, which means announcer, did not act as equivalent stimuli and did not provoke a corresponding change in the thresholds of light sensitivity. However, if the subject was given the appropriate dose of chloral hydrate and the cortex was put into an inhibitory state, the system of equivalent links changed, and now the patient being in a drowsy state, the word dictor, which is similar in sound to the keyword of doctor, began to provoke the same conditioned reflex insensitivity, while the synonymous words leka and vrach lost their character of equivalent stimuli. Analogous tests have been carried out using different objective indicators, with salivary and galvanic skin and vascular reactions and depression of electrical activity of the brain and so forth, blood coagulation reactions. And so, I mean, I do think it's intriguing
Mhm.
that consciously I mean, I'm making these conclusions that consciously we may be able to override uh, those associations that we subconsciously may tend to make between
Mhm.
similar sounds versus similar meanings. And so that the disparity that conventional language has in those two systems, um, he was trying to rectify, I guess, or bring into kind of an isomorphic harmony, so that if it sounds similar, it also means similar.
Yeah. Then that is interesting. So, and I'm not up on the psychological research, so I'm not going to like attack that result necessarily.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's take it as a given that we can have situations where we associate homophones versus other cases where we uh, associate synonyms. That seems to make sense that we can be influenced in that way. How much does Aoui really address that? Because yes, a similar sound is going to have a similar meaning, but you also have very few phones available, and and I think it's worth talking about the way that you build words with this language. You have to put together a bunch of these symbols together, and you could end up with pretty similar sounding words that have pretty different meanings still, right?
To some extent, but I don't know. I know you talked about that, and I don't know that that's really so much the case. I mean, certainly not so much the case as you will find in other of a priori language efforts, in which they at least as far as that I've seen,
Mm-hmm.
um, there are, sona. I mean, there's all these. I have them listed here somewhere. There's quite a few of a good day. I don't know if that rings a bell to you. It's listed in the Frath Wiki, one of the Frath Wiki entries. There's like a whole bunch of languages, and that were with an effort to make them have some meaningful relationship, that
Yeah.
the letters at least are it have some innate meaning. But the difference is, and those words that I've seen, they are
Mm-hmm.
very similar. Oh my gosh, it would be very hard to tell them apart because you're still only using letters. And whereas in Aoui, you have the symbol, the morpheme, the iconic symbol attached to it, which then still makes you be able to differentiate them quite a bit.
Yeah, that is the case if it's written. When you are, but it is also meant to have a spoken register with the sounds.
Yeah,
And you know, one thing I would say is that yes, you have all of these concepts that each have a unique sound, right? However, another part of that is that some of the sounds, depending on your language background, may sound very similar. A and E can sound very similar to different people, right? So, and then you are ending up with a confusion of the movement and light, right? So, I am interested in all these ideas that go into this language, and I think the process that your father went through to choose the symbols that he did and the semantic primitives that he did is very interesting. I just you know I'm just poking at some of the
yeah,
claims.
I understand that. I
Yeah,
mean, you know,
yeah.
the thing is that um, even if E and E, if you can't distinguish that, I mean, Ui, I mean, doesn't actually have greatly different sounds than other languages. I guess
Hmm.
I'm not quite sure, and it doesn't. I mean, most languages don't have about this number of phonemes. Is that not
Well,
correct?
I was just giving an example, like
Yeah. Okay.
a
Well, but I mean,
a
even
and e. Yeah,
yeah, E
I
and
was just saying. Yeah, I mean, well, so there are so the vowel sounds. There's five vowels and then a length distinction, right? Is
yeah,
that how this? Yeah,
yeah. So it's u, and o.
yeah. Popping in with an editor's note, I said in the podcast here that we has five vowels, and I was mistaken on that. It actually has seven because it has e and the front rounded vowels. It's a little bit weird because e alternates with y, probably just from English spelling. But yeah, those vowels are there in the language. So, I mean, when I say depending on your language background,
Yeah.
okay, five vowels will work for a lot of human, of a lot of language backgrounds. But not all languages will have a length distinction. Some people that might get lost on them. There are a decent number of languages that have only three vowels, the a, e, and u, and they might have slightly more difficulty distinguishing like e from e and o from u, right? So it 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 may depend a little bit on your language background previously, like how effective it is on the phonological side, on the sound side, that separation is. Um, I it is definitely a fascinating sort of attempt at some kind of a universal language or a philosophical language.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't, I have tried to get away from the idea that this is ever going to be spoken internationally. I mean, that's
Right.
that is not going to happen. Certainly not in our lifetime. I don't know. Maybe after the apocalypse with our current situation here, we might have to have a total
Yeah.
renewing of everything that has existed so far. But who knows? Um, so I don't. That's kind of not where I'm at. As you know, any language is going to be difficult for some people to learn, and we
Yeah.
can't. It's just not. It's not. I mean, how would yeah, how would you do that? I mean, I don't think I am. I and as far as an international auxiliary language, that's also, I don't know. That's I'm trying to be realistic, and
Yeah.
so that's I'm more interested in it from just more of a research perspective. And and I did want to address that E and E, even though you possibly could confuse those, they are still, E light, E sound. They're still sort of in the realm of something that's related. So, I mean,
Okay.
it's still, you still have relationships. They are still somewhat ooh and ooh. I mean, so yeah. And by the way, if I could share the screen at some point, not necessarily right now, I could show how the word sound and related words sound.
Well, you
And
could do that. Yeah.
yeah, um, did that address your second question?
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
we were
I
talking about the propaganda. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so that pretty much, I mean, that is, my father said that slogans don't cause war. He said that they possibly can trigger war because they can focus these
hmm
tensions and frustrations of a people that, at least this was the situation after the
hmm
First World War, that and focus them on a scapegoat and so forth. I mean, it's happening now. So um, uh,
Yeah.
anyway,
I
so
and I am sympathetic to that in some ways. I will say, like, slogans can also trigger like good actions
right,
sometimes.
hmm
Like in lots of there's lots of protests for good uh
right,
for good causes that use slogans. I would say, um I, again, I'm just like poking at like how effective is this at what it's aiming to do, because that ultimately one of my things I will say about any conlang is you can only judge it by how effective it is at what it's trying to do, because people come into this, like art form, science, whatever, with a whole lot of different aims and a whole lot of different practices. Um, and and most what I do is artistic. I am doing it as an art form, and I also generally aim to make naturalistic languages. So this is definitely something that's way outside my comfort zone to be working with, right? Um, uh, but you know, coming around to looking at Aoui, the only way I can judge it is kind of think of like what what is it aiming to do, um, and it seems to be that it's aiming to change the way people think and communicate in certain specific ways. And I just kind of ask, and you know, neither one of us has like much hard data on like how effective it is, right? And that's one of the things that you want to do is try to get some research involved to see if it does like actually have any effect on thinking, right?
yeah. And I have some examples of things that, I mean, of just of some connections in or at least projects
Mm-hmm.
in psycholinguistics that would be interesting. I can mention later, but yeah, well, I have, you know, my thinking has, of course, evolved too. I mean, this is, from this overpowering um, sense that we grew up with, that
Mm-hmm.
that we needed to um, that Aoui would be the language for peace through understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and world wars happen every 30 years, my father said, and an average throughout history, about every generation there are some kind of world wars, and so he was very there was a lot of at least I felt it as a child, um, well, not mandate, but at least pressure to, that if I didn't continue this, it would be a disaster and so forth. But anyway, I'm just saying that's why it's taken me so long to come to evolve to a more objective um,
Right.
viewpoint of Aoi, and to feel like really, ideally, it should be subject to some kind of research. And what I'm saying there, not only in this semantic conditioning types of experiments, which I haven't been able to find anything more recent in that
Mm-hmm.
direction, and
Yeah.
and but what we do find more recently is this idea of phonological neighborhood density, and then
Mm-hmm.
semantic mapping, mapping and versus phonological mapping, brain mapping of where our sounds are produced, and where the meanings reside, and so that possibly, there could be some research whether that um, activation of and location of um, phonemes, or well, sounds versus meanings in the brain, whether, if a language like this might have a difference in that. And I'm sorry, I can't explain this unless I read it to you, but there are some papers that I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
here loaded up. But anyway, so that's where I think it's really more, that's where it's at more for me, in a realistic way.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe. Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it it may be something worth investigating. Um, and one thing before, because we're coming close to the time I usually have for my podcast, but
Mhm.
if we go over, that's fine. I will do want to say, like, do you encounter a lot of criticism of, like, the particular um symbols that were chosen for Aoi? Because that, I think, is something that people might, quibble over whether these really are the basic concepts, right?
Yeah. Um, the the only corroborating evidence that I can point to is Anna Wilspitska's NSM, that natural semantic meta language.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You,
And
you
Flip got
you
it.
pointed me to it, and I think
Yeah,
I had seen it before.
right. And they that's their goals are different from Aui,
Mm-hmm.
but they are very much along the lines of, finding these, and finding these semantic primes that are, however, lexically represented in every other language that they studied, and I think it
Right.
was about 30 or something. And so, of the current list of the 65, I believe it's 65 NSM primes, 29 correspond directly or are closely related to Aoui primes. That's 44%. And of the 42 Aoui primes, if you include the numerals, these 29 direct or close NSM primes would amount to 69%.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some corroboration there, and these have been studied. And the rest of them, the rest of their, what they're calling primes, can be fairly easily formulated with a few symbols in Aoui. So they're, yeah. So that's what
Yeah,
I
yeah. And
say.
there's definitely an attempt at economy that, some people that are looking for semantic primes might object to, because like you have a word for good, you don't have a word for bad. I presume that you would just combine negation with good in order to get the word for bad, right? And similarly, you don't have below, you only have above. But um, um, I do have my own skepticism that there even is a universal set of semantic primes. That's not to say that we don't have meanings in common as humans across languages. It's just that that is definitely a given, since we are all human, and so there are certain experiences that we have in common. But like exactly how that is instantiates in different languages, and whether semantic primes are like an inbuilt thing versus just like something that happened by happenstance, is a question. But it is interesting. It is interesting that some portion of the symbols in Aoui are similar to other things that other people have determined to be semantic primes on based on other research. So that is interesting, and it probably goes to like the process your father went through and the quality of that work in actually drilling down and trying to find these basic concepts as as well as he could. I view Aoi as a very interesting experiment in what language could be. Um, just like a lot of other sort of experimental, uh, uh, just like a lot of other engineered languages that are out there, um, whether they go into like class- classification or this oligosynthetic route like Aoui does, or um, Tokipana is similar in that it has a very reduced set of lexemes that are used, um, or if they just have like radically different ways of forming words and sentences. Um, I only want to poke at things just because I I look at the website and I see
Yeah.
some claims that I just want to, as a linguist, want to like poke at, and I'm like, hmm, is this really doing what is being claimed here?
Well, and we that our process of website is has been kind of a quite a process itself, and I've this is now the third website that and I we are finally back to a WordPress site, and with the idea that I can now edit that more easily myself,
Mm-hmm.
and so I will be making changes on that, because I mean I'm learning, I am learning all the time about what is safe to say and what is not. And I mean, it's it's I but coming where I come from, it's been a long process to find that objectivity. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that are kind of that I found interesting from this Umberto Eco's book here, um, about the idea that um, they said here um, the let's see, the above notions. Let's see. Let me see here. The above notions are not irrelevant to our inquiry because, as we shall see, many perfect languages, at least the philosophical ones, as quote philosophical or quote perfect, aspired to such a conformal status. They considered both double articulation and the non-conformal relationship as a source of potential ambiguity and tried to assign a precise content to every sound. So um, this duality of patterning or double articulation, where you have on the one side you
Mm-hmm.
have the uh, morphemes, the lexemes and morphemes that are meaningful, but the phonemes are not. Um, and so the whole idea of making a connection to reality is to bring those to make a, a connection with
Mm-hmm.
reality, right? And
Yeah.
so the whole question is that something that is of um, usefulness? Is that
Right.
something that's worth striving for? And
And
can that
and it's worth asking the question, I think. Um, my my own thought is that human languages evolved the way they did for reasons. That doesn't mean that they're perfect. That doesn't mean that there's not potentially some way to improve upon them. But we have to understand that they evolved in this way because of our history as a species and because of our particular instincts and how they build into language, right? So when I look at something like Aoui, I'm like, it's definitely worth asking the question whether this could be something better. Whether it is, I still will have some skepticism unless
right?
I see like people using it and see actual like effects from it, right?
And yeah, and I would say though that the evolution of language is not the same thing as evolution of our biological evolution. So I mean, it's not like we're evolving like survival of the fittest kind of thing, that
Mm.
if you survive, then that language is therefore uh, more improved than the language before that or whatever. That I don't know if those are two types of evolution. I don't. Yeah. Um,
Um, well, I would say so. It is a little complicated because language is also shaped more by social forces than by other things. I will say that like a language that would not be useful for humans to use to communicate would probably not survive. Would not probably not be passed on. So
mhm.
there are some things that are similar to biological evolution, but at the same time, there's a lot of external forces on languages that make it a do make it a little bit less um, survival of the fittest because there's so many effects from politics and social dominance and things like that that affect it. But we're this we're coming up on time,
Yeah.
and it's getting a bit late because of when we had to do this recording. But I I will leave it to you, Andrea. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before
Well, I
we
don't,
end the show?
can I still show this, my the word kind of, it's kind of a word progression.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure. Let's
you can,
let's go through that quickly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So here we have E, that's our light symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see the cursor too?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So E, and then Eve is the action ending. So we have light, and then Eve makes it a verb, to shine, or
Uh-huh.
light as a and Eov is feeling or sense, sensation. So when we sense light, Eov, we see, and then Teov, towards seeing, might be a word for look, to look, and Atiov then might be with time. If you spend time looking, might be the word for watch, to watch. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have Iv, Eov, Tiov, Atiov.
Mm-hmm.
And Viv, you can make it a causative. So to make shine might be, or to make light might be, would be, to turn on the light. Viov, to make see, would be to show. Here, Viov. And here, just another example. So inside, G, and Uv is mind, verb is to think.
Uh-huh.
So Uv is, what's inside the mind is knowledge, and we're talking in conceptual and in partly metaphorical sense too. So guv, to know, the verb for
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, to know, and then et guv, movement towards knowing, would be to study, and then vet guv, to make study, uh, is a word for teach, and
Mm-hmm.
retguv, to um, to learn, to study well, is the word for to learn. So there
Okay.
you can uv, guv, et guv, vet guv, ret guv. So, and I have a lot more examples here of how to make distinctions with quite, you can, I mean, to me it is always amazing that you can make quite uh, quite detailed distinctions, and just by adding a few symbols. But it is also there is a way of understanding, the Aoui symbols, or the words, the formulations, that that does take some learning, and that is based not only on kind of on intuitive logic, but also on metaphor, and also,
Right.
there is also some idiomaticity.
Right.
Is that the word?
Right. That's what I am seeing too, is that there you still have to rely on metaphors,
Yeah.
especially for more abstract
But
things.
that's how language works. I mean, that is,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't know that it's that different. It relies on those kinds of language
Yeah. But
linguistic.
it is really interesting, and it is interesting how you could have so few symbols
Hmm.
and arrange them into meaningful words. And that, I think, is also going to be useful. I think that's also a reason for conlangers to look at Aoui as inspiration, just to like have an idea of like how much you can get out of this small number of roots, right? Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's definitely been a pleasure talking to you, Andrea, and I did enjoy our talk. I hope I wasn't too strong on my pushing back on
No,
a few
no,
things, but
no. I I thank you for that additional time that I had to prepare, because it's definitely a
Hmm.
learning process. I do have to mention my book that is based on Aoui.
Hmm.
So that is available on the website. It's a novel, and it's based on Aoui, and it carries the idea of slogans to an extreme, kind of like almost a farce. But
Yeah.
it's also based on that research, that semantic conditioning research. So I think I think it's interesting. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. You guys, I can link to that as well if people want to check out that book. But thank you, Andrea.
thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure having you on, and it's really great to have someone connected to a language that I've heard about for decades, right? Um, and have you on and talk a little bit about the philosophy behind it. But thank you for being on, and thank you everyone for listening, and happy conlaying.
Thanks so
Okay.
much.
Thank you for listening to Conlangery. You can find archives and show notes at conlangery.com. And if you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to go to our Patreon at patreon.com/conlangery. With just $1, you can get access to exclusive polls for my Tongues and Runes series. And also, for $5, you can get every podcast episode early and ad-free. And now to thank our patrons: Mintaka, Kenan Kigunda, Connor Stewart Rowe, Jesse, Kay, Alex Russell Hayes, Viren Patrick, Tabby, Alexis Hugelman, Sylvia Sotomayor, Grammar Antifa, Raka Grunk, Sigourney Hunter, Eloivar Yana Mentaleo, Nicholas Norblad, Anthony Dosimo, Jake Penny, Artifexian, Miles Ronkovich, Daniel Quigley, Paul Roser, R. Table, Langworm, Nye, and Horn Bori. Thank you. Conlangery's theme music is by Null Device. Conlangery is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license.